welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Giebert, and this is episode 2 of a mini-series dedicated to Brandenburg Concerto No. 1. If you want to hear about the first movement of this work, we talked about it last week. Today, we zoom in on movement 2. The searing pain and anguish that this movement evokes is such an amazing contrast. It does remind me of some of his opening sinfonias to the more dismal and sad cantatas. It reminds me a little bit of the Sinfonia to 21, Ich hatte viel Bekümmernis. Oh yeah. Because of the alternation between a violin and an oboe, I think is what is really making that sound like to me. Although there are some notable differences like the meter, but it does have that lamenting feel to it. It's such a contrast from the opening movement that we explored last week, which is essentially a joyful duple meter dance with horn calls in it. Yeah. To quickly review what a concerto grosso is, these Brandenburg concertos are concerto grossos, concerti grossi in Italian. It means big concerto, but it means more than just big. It has a specific connotation that there are a small group of solo instruments against a larger group of instruments playing a background material, accompaniment type of material. Mm-hmm. We call that small group the concertino, and we call that large group the ripieno. Sometimes it's quite obvious who the concertino is versus the ripieno. In Brandenburg 5, there's a harpsichord written out part that's really hard, and then there's a flute solo and violin solo. So those are the concertino, and then the other strings are the ripieno. In this one, in this concerto in its entirety, you've got a little bit more obscurity between the ripieno and the concertino. But you do have those horns featured in the first movement, and then you do have the first oboe featured in this movement. And a solo violin. Even more than just being a solo violin, this is a violino piccolo, a small violin, transposed instrument, not really used in the modern day orchestral instrumentation. Because it would be an E-flat violin, wouldn't it? Where the music here is in the key of 1 flat, and we know that the horn part is transposed already. The violin part, the concertino violin, this piccolo violin, piccolo just meaning small, is in a different key. It's in a transposed key. It would have to be in order to match the others, but that just puts it in 2 sharps, so like B minor, which is not at all difficult. But the reason why Bach would use such an instrument is to play easier in a high range, and that is what happens with this violin soloist. After the beginning 4 bars is for the oboe, but then the violin takes over. But after that, the bass instruments take over. The bassoon and the violon and the continuo instruments take over. And there is the most wonderfully despicable cross-relation harmony that happens when those bass instruments take the melody. And this is one of my moments for today. I've chosen 2 small moments from this movement. This is the first one. We're already accustomed to hearing this melodic phrase, the one that's going to begin on this G. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I know we've kind of said this before, Alex, but doesn't this kind of flavor sort of seem like kind of noir? Maybe this is like in some sort of seedy underbelly bar, sort of restaurant in Italy, and there's some like, mob talk going.
Yeah, like the Godfather scene in the restaurant.
Yeah, it just there's everybody smoking cigars, that's just what it seems like.
It is. And I mean, actually that Italian influence is there. This is very Vivaldi. Not that mob movies really have a lot of classical music, but actually a famous example is The Godfather, and the score for that is very classically influenced. So maybe that's the connection there, right?
Maybe.
But yeah, it's the sort of seediness or dirtiness to the music works well to complement the sort of dirtiness of the soul of the type of characters that are in a mobster movie, right?
Yeah, darkness is the way I'd put it, and that's why it's noir, I guess. It has some...
It's dark.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we use food or taste adjectives when we're talking about dissonance. We say like, oh, that's crunchy dissonance, or we say that's spicy. Those are spicy. That note is spicy. And here, I think maybe more appropriate would be like bitter or sour. Maybe bitter would be more appropriate. I don't know which one is better, bitter or sour for this. Certainly the cross-relation note is kind of sour.
Yeah, we'll say sour. We've talked before on this podcast about cross-relation. Generally, it's like when in one part you have a note as it is, let's say F natural, and then in another part you have that same scale step but differently expressed, such as like F sharp, that happen consecutively, like one right after another one, like. And then even more striking are the ones that are simultaneous, that happen vertically, like at the same time. A lot of those are like reminding us of a flavor of really old 16th century English vocal music, where in one voice that's going up, it might be an F sharp, and then in one voice going down, it might be an F natural. And so they linearly make sense, but it's a very strong clash at the moment that it happens.
Yeah.
And here's is something kind of like that, although this one is not very common even in Bach, this particular kind, and I don't recall ever hearing this anywhere else, this particular arrangement of 4 pitches, the way they result. And Bach was purposefully making this harsh, even though he knew he was still perfectly following the rules because of cross-relation. What happens is, we've heard the 3 oboes doing their background here as we begin this bar. And then the strings continue that. The bass is getting the melody here. But there's something wrong. And it's because he wanted the A flat in the bass line. But he's got a 3-part parallel harmony of a triad pulsating
in the middle.
You've got da da da.
Yeah.
And so you have an A natural there. A natural. And on the bottom you have A flat. So you're going to have a cross relation between the A natural and the A flat. Fine. That's going to sound harsh enough as it is. But I think it's even stranger that the rest of the chord is also filled out. So you also have G, F sharp. So now there's an even stranger dissonance between the F sharp and the lower A flat. You have an augmented 6th interval, even though this isn't an augmented 6th chord in the sense that we use it in music theory. That interval is augmented 6th there between those 2 parts. We have G, F sharp, G, and the bottom we have G, A flat, G. That one's actually pretty logical in linear fashion in terms of those 2 being linear parts. And then the viola underneath filling out that harmony, so you have 3 parts on top, which sound completely harmless alone until you add the bottom part. Just stunning and so strange.
One thing to note here, too, is this figure in the bass happens 3 times in the piece. The first time it's in G minor, the second time A minor, the third time D minor. The first and third times, the oboes and violins have the same rhythmic layout. It goes like da da, and the oboe suddenly is da da, da, violin on beats 2 and 3. So it's a call and response between oboe and violin. And the second time, when this material is in A minor, that is reversed. The violins are first, then the oboes, which causes the oboe to be the one with the cross relation dissonance to the bass. Not only is the oboe dissonance with the bassoon way more striking sounding to me, but the oboe 1 ends up, in the voicing of the chord, the oboe 1 ends up with that sour note. It's a B natural in this case against a B flat in the bassoon and the rest of the bass instruments. And that one sounds a little more sour to me.
Makes sense, yeah, different color.
And the reason why he switched those, by the way, why he switched the oboes and violins in that section is because in that second go-around, that's what happens to the concerto instruments as well. He's got their roles now switched also.
Yeah, you rarely hear these things the same the second time with Bach. They usually in a different key and something else switched as well. So the last bass motive leads us into the ending, and as is customary for inner slow minor key movements in this kind of concerto, the end is some kind of decorated cadence that winds down to a dominant chord and ends in an unresolved fashion. And that's what happens here. On the last note, we end on the chord of A major, which is what we expect. Getting into it, we have a little feature for an instrument. In this case, it's the first oboe, which is also pretty expected. What's not expected is the path that Bach chooses to connect that first thing to the second thing. That is so cool. It's the instrumentation that makes this cool. It could have just been all accompanied. It should have been dum bum bum. In the oboe, it should have just terminated there. It should have been da dum dum bum bum on 1. But the oboe has a rest on beat 1. And then when the first oboe returns on beat 2, it doesn't have the D. It's a different note. It's lower. It's a B flat. Da rest. B flat. That's so weird.
It's a subversion in like every way too, because he also adds piano marking to the bass.
Yeah.
So not only do you not terminate that cadence the way you think it's going to, but suddenly everything drops out but the bass, and they're soft. And then beat 2, as you said, Christian, you get the wrong note from the oboe. It's a B flat. It's a deceptive cadence.
But it's a deception on the deceptive cadence because, at least in this performance, on the downbeat is only one bass D note, and they're rendering it as a root position. In this harpsichord, it's displaying a D minor chord. It could have played the deceptive B flat major chord there.
Oh, yeah.
But that chord doesn't happen until the second beat. So the second beat is sort of the expected end of a deceptive cadence, but you can't literally call it that in music theory because we did already get to D minor, so now we're on to another thing. But I think subjectively you could call it that. Then what is happening here? We're in triple meter, and we have bass note, there's oboes, there's strings here. Then we go bass, oboe, string, bass, oboe, string.
Yeah, like large scale, it's bass going from 1, 7, 6, 5, just ending on 5, right?
Mm-hmm. It makes sense in a large scale, but when it's happening, you're like, what is going on here?
The connecting those bass downbeats.
Yeah, and just to clarify, in case you might be thinking, I feel harmonically unpinned. I think that's the point. But if he wanted it to be extremely obvious, he would have just accompanied it all with a bass line. And that bass line would have actually not moved, but it would have helped, I think it would have helped us understand what was happening better, which is not what he wanted. And it would sound like this. And so on. Because that D could have continued on. But his choice to rest the oboe on the downbeat there, and to have the bass continuo playing only the downbeats and then resting on 2 and 3 creates this strange kaleidoscope turning of like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. It's like different little mini orchestras. You got bass, and then you got 3 oboes, and then you got 3 string parts. Enough to make just one chord, just one triad. The one that really sticks out to me is the one on beat 3 of that first measure.
Yeah, the secondary dominant, right? It's the dominant of A minor.
Because it appears to not have a bass note, and it's in a weird position. A viola note on the chord 5th, which is not very sturdy. But again, it is implied that the bottom note is still D. And so on top of that D goes the E major chord, which gives us what it actually is, which is, as you said, it's a secondary dominant going into A minor. It has this chord 7th on the bottom. So that D that doesn't even exist on beats 2 and 3 is doing a lot of work, because first it's the root, and then it's the 3rd of the B flat major chord. And then it's the 7th of an E dominant 7th chord, if we're going to speak in completely chord terms. And then it continues like that for 2 more measures as we walk down, although different diminished harmonies are introduced as well. It's really, he didn't have to do this. We always come back to this with Bach's work. It's like he didn't have to go the extra step of making the texture interesting, and the weirdest of all, dropping out the oboe at the termination of that cadence, and all the other instruments, by the way, except the bass. The 2nd, 3rd oboe, and all of the strings, except for the bass instruments, are also left out, and the only thing there is that unison D on the bottom, plus whatever the harpsichordist is going to play, which in this case was a D minor chord, but still it's weird that that's all just gone. He didn't have to do any of this. He could have just done so that would have worked fine. But no, he took 3 or 4 extra steps to make it 3 or 4 times more dreadfully strange and interesting and dark. And the unmooring of not having that bass note there for beats 2 and 3 is so brilliant. It's so sad. It's in the noir movie. It's like when it's the death of someone. It's just so much more than bum 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 bum. It's like that times a million.
let's hear both of those moments of Bach from this second movement of Brandenburg 1. First, here is that cross relationship between violins and the bass line. And here is that unmoored ending. If this introduction to Movement 2 of Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 has piqued your interest about the rest of this work, you can find a very well-produced video by the Netherlands Bach Society that we will link in the episode description. Okay, that was the second episode in our mini-series of the Brandenburg Concerto No. 1 in F major. Let's continue next week, Alex, with the next movement, Allegro. Okay. Until next time, enjoy those moments.